Okay, I think we're ready to start. We've got everyone. So welcome to Parallel Session A, which is the rural focus. Just to check everyone's in the right room. If you want urban, that's next door. I'm Naomi Oates. I'm a research officer here at ODI, working on the water policy programme. I previously worked on the Climate and Development Knowledge Network, and my background is more in climate change policy, but I've been working in water for about 2 or 3 years now, mainly on the social, institutional aspects, but more and more getting a better understanding of some of the technical issues, for example, around groundwater. So just to outline the format of this session, we have 4 presentations of 10 minutes each. I'm going to have to be quite strict with presenters to keep them to time. And then this is followed by around 50 minutes discussion, depending on where we've got to at that point, up until lunch, which is at 1 o'clock. For the sake of time, I'm going to save question and answer to the end of the 4 presentations. So just please hold your thoughts, jot down any good burning questions you have, and I'll come back to you. And please, both presenters and people posing questions, remember there's an online audience, microphones are very important. So first up, we have Jeff Parkins from Newcastle University, and I think I'll leave it to you, Jeff, to introduce your presentation.
Okay, thank you. And first of all, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak about the work we've been doing over the last year. I'm going to speak about the outcome, some of the outcomes from a Catalyst project funded under UPGro that we've been carrying out. And I'll mention at the end, unfortunately, we weren't in the position to have been funded. We marginally missed out on the funding for the follow-on project. So I'll make a mention of that at the end. The project is rather long title, Adaptive Management of Shallow Groundwater for Small-Scale Irrigation and Poverty Alleviation in Sub-Saharan Africa. Do we have a... Sorry, the...
What do you need, sorry?
Just the point of it.
Yes, there you go.
Okay. The focus of the project was on small-scale irrigation from shallow groundwater. There have been various definitions of what we mean by a shallow groundwater system, and we've notionally suggested 25 metres, but it's really the water that's accessed by small communities and for small-scale irrigation, so largely hand-dug wells or hand-augered wells, and of course this depends upon the hydrogeological situation on the properties of the geology, and we've found that this is one of the major factors. We are concerned, obviously, with interactions with deeper aquifers, but our focus remains on small-scale community. And really what we're looking towards is how these communities can develop their way out of their current sort of situation. So the premise that we had is that shallow groundwater resources are the ones most likely to be used by communities, firstly because they're easily accessible, but the downside of this is that they're more likely to be vulnerable to both over-exploitation, certainly climate risk, because they've got less storage potentially than larger aquifers, then climate variability can make them more vulnerable. And as exploitation increases in sub-Saharan Africa, some of these may then become critically overexploited. So what we are aiming to do was look at the potential for poverty reduction and look at how communities can assess and manage their own resources. So the aim is the centre box of this slide, community-based adaptive management of shallow groundwater. So our intention is that although there are larger scale governance arrangements, in many cases the local communities are where the decisions are made about how groundwater and surface water are used. So we wanted to keep that as the focus and then look at the contexts around that. So we have two main sort of platforms that I'll talk about here. One of them is participatory monitoring, and the other is hydrogeological modelling. But this is all done within a larger framework, and we're concerned with issues of equity of access, particularly if there are larger scale irrigators or abstractors that are affecting groundwater supply, conflicts over use, and particularly groundwater and surface water interactions, and how conflicts might be felt across different scales. So this fairly complicated diagram is intended to give the scope of what we were aiming to do over the longer time scale, and really make a link between the sort of national and regional scale assessments, and that covers both some of the things that we've heard about this morning, such as the large-scale assessments through GRACE, global climate models, which are providing assessments of groundwater potential at that scale. But really what we're interested in is how that maps onto local communities and local resources. And we have an understanding that local resources can be highly fragmented, so the resource that's available to a community really depends upon local monitoring. So we have we started off with a framework that looked at both the social and governance aspects as well as the resource assessment. But for the time available here, I'm just going to focus on the resource assessment side. So we have in the centre a resource unit scale, and in this case, this is a catchment for which we have long time scale hydrological flow data, and then linking that to the community scale. And I will describe what we've done in integrated groundwater surface water modelling using our model called SHETRAN, which represents the whole water cycle. And we think this is important because of the management that needs to take both groundwater and surface water into account. And then at the community scale, the key work was working with local communities who are observing their own resource. So the catchment we looked at which was our pilot study in Ethiopia, just south of Lake Tana. We have, as part of the governance system, the scales of governance are national, regional, in this case the Amhara region, and then the governance system goes down to the Warrida scale, the Dangala Warrida we focused, and then within that the governance system goes down to Kabelis, and we looked at one of those, Dangeshta. But the governance system doesn't map onto the resource scale, so our catchment was the Kilty catchment, which is a similar size to the Warrida, but is a sort of transboundary at this scale. So the management of the resource has to involve multiple governance areas. So to give you some detail of the resource assessment, we carried out with Ethiopian Geological Survey geophysical cross-sections across the area. And this figure highlights, it's an interpreted geophysical cross-section. It highlights that there's a lot of variability locally within the system. We're talking of weathered basalt aquifers with overlying valley alluvial deposits. And both of these contain exploitable water. And obviously these two sources interact, and we're interested in where communities can put their water wells and how that builds up into the larger scale, catchment scale, understanding of the water supply. So we have some deeper aquifers interacting with shallow aquifers, and what we find is that these are quite fragmented, and that's what we're interested in exploring. So from that data and an assessment of dug wells, springs and surface water courses.
2 minutes, Jeff.
Okay. we identified hydrogeological zones where we have different levels of groundwater potential, illustrated here. Now with the modelling, we tried to then link the catchment scale model. Illustrated here, we have a sample of part of the hydrograph at the catchment scale, and we can break that down into components from base flow, coming from groundwater, and surface runoff. The figure on the left shows some output from the model where we can then simulate at fairly high resolution the distribution of stream flow and the linked groundwater flow, which I'll show on the next slide, and link this with the hydrogeological zones. So we're trying to make that link between the larger scale, and this is zooming into part of that model, showing groundwater levels with some of the boreholes that we investigated. And the time series figure shows the community monitored levels. We use simple technology, just a simple dipper and a gauge board in the stream and a daily rain gauge. So simple technology that the community can use. And you can see here that we've got dynamic responses. Unfortunately, so far we only have the transition from dry to wet season, but we're hoping to continue with this monitoring to see the drying phase. Very briefly, we've looked at the large-scale climate variability. This is showing the precipitation on the left, linking local observations with the TRMM, the remote sensing rainfall global product, looking at variability over a period of time. And on the right, this illustrates the variability in the hydrology. And in particular, the blue line shows the median, and the diamonds show the peak monthly maximum discharge. So it shows that there's a high variability and non-linear response. To come to a conclusion, what we are aiming to do with this is building on this detailed research to produce simple tools that local communities can use to produce adaptive management where they can monitor sufficient information on their own resources and use fairly simple tools to do their decision making and adapt their decision making as they get local evidence. So to summarise briefly, we think this preliminary work, we've demonstrated the value of community-based monitoring, linking with surface and groundwater modelling. We're intending to develop simplified tools and to continue the monitoring. And as we haven't got the continuation of the funding, we do actually have a separately funded PhD study looking at all of these aspects, linking across scales. What I would like to conclude with is a request that for the PhD study, if there are opportunities for collaboration with other projects, then we would welcome this, and also as part of the knowledge brokering of UPGro, how we can continue to engage with the UPGro despite not having the full-scale funding. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. I won't dwell too long on your presentation for now, but we can come back to questions later. Slightly different topic now, but I think some similarities in terms of the mixture of technical and kind of softer science approaches. So John Chilton from the International Association of Hydrogeologists is going to present on understanding the multiple causes of failure of rural groundwater supplies.
Thanks, Naomi. For the purposes of this very short time, I shall concentrate largely on some of the policy implications of the work, which is the guidance I was given from the beginning. What crisis? There's evidence that a large number of hand pumps are not functioning within 2 years of being constructed and in place. We're losing a lot of the benefits and the cost is high. But the important thing really is that 300 million people are still without access to improved water supplies in sub-Saharan Africa. And many of these live in groundwater dependent countries. And we know from Alan MacDonald's maps that a lot of these people live in areas where we'll have to work pretty hard to get them improved supplies. So there is an immediate policy and strategic implication for the work from the work. Why do hand pumps fail? It's up to date, and during the time I've been working in this field, it's been largely anecdotal, with many reasons being given that are listed there. But what we set out to do, and I've always thought to myself when I've been in why do they really fail? And UPGro has offered us an opportunity to really look at the underlying causes of failure. And again, from a policy implication, if we can really understand why they fail, then we can begin to mitigate things and improve our approach to rural water supply programs. So we took when we were looking at the conceptual side of things before we started, we look at symptoms, which is what you actually see in the field when a hand pump is not working. The immediate causal factors of lack of water, mechanical failure, and so on, and then the underlying causes. And when we were having our very nice conceptual discussions in WaterAid's offices with Richard, it's often, you can think of it almost as a medical analogy. We're looking at the patient and trying to find out what's going on. And it's actually much more complicated than that. And this is a diagram that we developed in the beginning. The failure is the failed water point or failed service is in the middle. The orange factors around the side are the immediate causal are the symptoms. The black are the causal factors, and out on the edge are the red, the underlying root causes. And we delved down to find these by moving out, looking at the linkages, and asking why in each case. Why is it like this? Why did this? Why is it not? Why is the borehole not constructed very well? Why is there not enough water? Wasn't it sited properly? And that's the sort of conceptual approach that we've adopted. We chose with our partners a study in eastern Uganda with the help of WaterAid and the Ugandan government. We took a definition of failure that you can see there. We carried out some very nice community surveys in one phase of the project, and then we did some technical work in the field. And we actually took some pumps and boreholes apart, really took them apart, observed them, photographed them, measured the water levels, inspected them with a closer CCTV, carried out pumping tests, and did full chemical analysis. And this, for myself and Richard and Alan, who've been around for quite a long time, I think this was really an opportunity to do something that we've wanted to do for a long time, to really get to the bottom of the story and find out if we could see what was happening in the field, where did this lead us back to? So in the 10 sites that we looked at in detail, we had symptoms of poor water quality, mechanical breakdown, low yield, and in our study area, the dominant causal factors were, you can see on the right-hand side of the slide, the poor low pH and EH of typical basement aquifer water, combined with the use of galvanized materials, almost inevitably gives you a high iron concentration in the water and big corrosion problems. The borehole designs were not always appropriate for the basement aquifer, a lack of understanding of the way that groundwater occurs and moves about in the basement, poor siting, low yield in the beginning. Maybe some of the boreholes were past as successful when they probably shouldn't have been, increasing water demand and capacity of the community. And we looked at all of the components of the service delivery chain. We looked at the preparation, the siting, the program side, contracting, supply of materials. We looked at construction, and we looked at the operation and maintenance phase. And you can see with this rather simple traffic light matrix, which I've simplified a little bit for the purposes of today. It'll be a little bit more developed and explained in the report and the publications that come from the project. That in our pilot study, and I emphasise that in our pilot study, the problems are mostly derived from what happens in the construction phase. But then again, following our concentric circular diagram, conceptual diagram, and going back and asking ourselves why, asking the communities why, asking the government why, we come to four, in this case, from a very limited sample, four really important underlying conditions and root causes. The practices of the implementing agencies, the way they procure, contract, supervise field work and design work, all aspects of the work. Lack of understanding of local groundwater conditions in the weathered basement aquifer, which is a pretty complicated aquifer in any case. Deficiencies in procurement processes and contracting. A total lack of supervision of design and construction. And in a way, with dispersed rural water supply programs, they almost mitigate against lack of supervision because the work is so broadly dispersed. And all of these derive partly from an absence of technical capacity in contractors, in government, in implementing agencies. And for communities, lack of training, difficulty of financing, and poor communication channels were highlighted as important contributing factors and underlying causes. But in a way, and both our partners, both of our principal partners in the programme have said that, well, we're not really giving the communities a chance in this case. We're handing them we're not really giving them a chance because we're not doing very well in the beginning. And
2 minutes.
So we should think about that. What next? Well, we could see that in a limited time and funds that we had in the Catalyst project, there were things that we hadn't done that were beyond our capacity to do, but that should be done if you start digging back into the underlying causes. We need to examine the roles, responsibilities and capabilities of government because it's different in different places. We need to look at the relationship between community management and wider government and institutional arrangements. Many of the communities were willing, but they didn't have the finance and they didn't have really good communication mechanisms to ask for help. We need to look harder at the role of the private sector in all parts of the process. We need to investigate more sites. Our field sample was inevitably small and quite biased. And we need to look at seasonal and time factors. Both the social work and the technical investigations were really snapshots, and you need to look over time from a point of view of groundwater resources and from a point of view of institutional and community aspects. And we need to continue to think conceptually about the science, the philosophy and logic of cause and effect, because this is not a simple question. And we were lucky, we have an opportunity to do these in the UPGro consortium grant, and we will be extending the fieldwork to Malawi and to Ethiopia. And I think what we've learnt is that really every picture tells a story, and if you start asking why, the story goes back quite a long way. Thank you.
Great, thank you, John. And I have to admit that I was also working on this project, but as chair, I will hold my tongue. So let's move on to Alida. So Alida Pelgrim-Adams is from Practica, and she's talking on perhaps a related subject on professionalisation of hand pump management in Africa. I'll give you the clock there. 10 minutes.
Okay, thanks. So first of all, I want to mention that I'm going to present something we did together with Portsmouth University. And unfortunately, Julia and Mariah, they're not here today, but they're working on a research project. It's called Sustainable Rural Water Management, with the main focus on Uganda, but they're also focusing a lot on hand pumps. And I'm going to share some first results, but they will come up with some publication on it early next year, I hope. So what are we talking about? Again, hand pumps. And there has been quite a lot of discussion on hand pumps in the last few years. And people are saying, hand pumps are not relevant anymore. We are now moving to piped systems. And I can agree on that, because these days you find piped systems everywhere, and even in very remote areas. There's a lot of implementation activities going on with piped systems, but I want to stress that there's still many areas where the hand pump is still a main option of supplying safe water to rural users. And talking about hand pump and specific hand pump management, we are most of the time talking about community-based management, which is the most common approach for hand pumps in sub-Saharan Africa. And I think the presentation of I forgot your name was a very good introduction, and I think I can fully agree on the hardware problems which exist in the field. But we did some short problem analysis, and our vision or our idea is that there's a main problem at the management side of the hand pumps. And this whole community-based management approach, which assumes that the community or an organized water management committee, so to say, has all the responsibility of maintaining the pumps, to keep the water flowing, and to collect the money, to arrange for maintenance. And what we see a lot in the field is that these communities, they lack the incentive to really keep the water flowing, and they do not really have the skills to arrange to make sure there's proper financial management. And also there's a lack of follow-up support, and I think the follow-up support is one of the main assumptions of the community-based management approach, which is, if you think about it from for example, I did some study in Western Kenya. I visited small districts. Within one district, there might be like 150 hand pumps, and every single hand pump has a committee, maybe 10 people. So can you imagine what are the follow-up requirements for such a, for example, if it's the government who's doing this, the required follow-up support, it's huge, and it's okay. I think that's one of the problems. The follow-up support, it's not given, but it's also not realistic, and it's very inefficient to have like 450 pumps. If you have 10 people per pump, you have like 1,500 people involved in just managing these simple hand pumps. I think that's very inefficient, and we can discuss on that. So before I'm going to share some alternative hand pump management options, I want to stress one thing that I think is very important is who pays. And for that, you always need to start with a very good overview of what are the costs, investment, running costs, replacement of any part, or replacement of the full pump, or to have a really good overview of all the costs on the long term. And then who's going to pay this, and how are you going to make sure that these payments are really done and that the money is in place when it's needed. And asking the question who pays, I don't mind what the answer is. Even the users can pay. In some countries, the government say, no, we don't ask money from water from hand pumps. Water from hand pumps should be for free. If the government is paying, I don't mind. But there need to be very proper arrangements that the payments are done. And if you want to establish that, you always need also good arrangement for how are you going to deal with non-payment. So there shouldn't be an option of non-payment, but that's what happens a lot in the current practice. Like, if one person doesn't pay and can still access the water, then the whole management system is out, and within 1 year or even within shorter time, the whole payments have stopped. So I just wanted to present some few alternatives to the community-based management approach, and we were in contact with about 20 organizations, and we have made a list of 15 alternatives, and I'm not going to share all of them, but you'll find more documentation on it next year. So one activity which you can find in several countries, and I try to stress the issue of efficiency, is clustering of hand pumps. For example, you see it a lot in Western Africa, but also even in Kenya, Madagascar, several countries where they cluster the hand pumps in groups. And then, for example, if you still work with the community management approach, you have one committee, water user committee, or how you call it, per group of hand pumps. So, for example, for 10 hand pumps. So from a follow-up perspective, you only work with these umbrella associations instead of all these single mini water committees. And besides clustering the hand pumps, you could also cluster the hand pump mechanics. For example, in Uganda, there are several activities with the hand pump mechanics associations. So per district, you have the hand pump mechanics, which you put in an association, and then they collaborate more. They get improved access to spare parts. They share knowledge. They even get contracts for rehabilitation programs. I think these are kind of improvements talking about hand pumps. But when it really gets to the local management and to the financial management at a very local level, we haven't really found very so to say, proven improvements from these two options. Then another option, which is very common in urban water supply, is public-private partnerships. And in rural water supply, you find less examples of these, but at least you'll find a few. And I think this is a very promising approach. But on the other hand, we have a list of, I think, even 10 or more examples, but all of them have very bad results. So that's not so nice. And I was talking to some people in the break, and they came up with a similar approach. And I think they're doing well, but I said it's tricky because I heard the bad results. So the main difference between community-based management and a public-private partnership is that the community is not the manager, but it's only the financer. So you can think of several options within a public-private partnership. For example, in West Africa, you see it a lot, for example, that, there are some cases that, for example, the private operators of a piped scheme in the same area also gets the responsibility for the hand pumps. And unfortunately, the examples, I have even 6 countries where they work with that, and in the end, the pipe scheme operators, they were not so interested to maintain the hand pumps because they didn't get enough profit from the hand pumps, so they just focused on the pipe schemes. And it's very important if someone has the responsibility that he also makes profit out of it, otherwise he wouldn't have any incentive to keep the water flowing. And there are other options, but I think I'm running out of time, so I'm going to... a very different approach is just to move away from the common hand pumps like AfriDev, India Mark, Vanier, the common communal hand pumps. But I think that's only part of the solution, and I'm not going to... I've been thinking about this, so I can discuss on this over lunch or after. But I want to very shortly share 2 cases I came across very recently. One is the Water as a Business program in Uganda. It's a program with Water for People. What they are doing, they also cluster the hand pumps, for example, 10 hand pumps, and an entrepreneur gets the responsibility of the management of these hand pumps. And at every hand pump, there's a caretaker who's collecting the money on a pay-as-you-fetch basis. And the good part here is that they work with metered hand pumps. So after a week or after a month, the entrepreneur can go to the caretaker and collect the money, and he exactly knows how much money was sold. And the experiences so far are quite good. I visited them 3 weeks ago, and I think this is a very good approach, but yeah, it's not easy. And another program I came across in the same mission 3 weeks ago was in Kenya, which is very, what can I say, a high-tech solution for hand pumps. But you know, prepaid systems are becoming more and more common in urban areas. But in Kenya, they are piloting prepaid systems for hand pumps. And the main problem with it at this moment is that the investment costs of the hardware is quite high. But in terms of the experiences and the users, all users have an own chip card, so they go to the pump to get water, and it's working quite well. So it might be promising. That's too short about these examples now. Just some few remarks which I think are very important for any hand pump management improvement. Okay, of course, working with the government and also the district approach, because especially if you think from a business perspective, you need some concentration of hand pumps. So you can't do one project there, one other project 100 kilometers away. So you need to really focus on a district or on a small scale where you include all the hand pumps. And then I've been talking about the costing and okay, so at Practica, what we are doing right now is that we really focus on the capacity of local entrepreneurs. So to see how can we build the capacity of local entrepreneurs and how can we make a good business plan for them, and how can we make hand pumps as an interesting business. And we really agree that this is not only hand pumps. So in one area you have different water supplies, and it might be combined with the same entrepreneur. But this is something we hope to work on in the future more. That's it.
Thank you. Just to clarify, so this study was done across multiple countries?
Yes, in total there's I think about 20 countries.
Okay,
yes.
So Uganda and Kenya are just 2 examples.
These are just 2 examples. So there are many countries from Western Africa. So it's a combination of literature research, and we had a lot of contact, email conversations, Skype conversations with all these organizations who are working on these pilot programs.
Okay.
Yes.
Great. So moving on to our final presentation. So Fabio Fussi, who's from the University of Milano Bicocca. I hope I pronounced that correctly. And how do you say it?
Bicocca.
Bicocca. Sorry, I'm not an Italian myself. So, use of remote sensing and terrain modelling to identify suitable zones for manual drilling in Africa and support low-cost water supply.
Okay, thanks very much. It works with this. Okay, thanks for your attention. So how it works. Okay, I will present the previous experience about identification of suitable zone for manual drilling and the research project we are running since 1 year ago with the UPGro financial support in these topics. My presentation will make a short introduction about what is manual drilling and what were the previous studies done with the manual drilling, our research project, the general research approach of our project from the scientific point of view, and how we deal with hydrogeological data processing, remote sensing, and the results achieved in the next steps. In this project and in all the question of manual drilling, I think that with Practica we have a collaboration. Well, many of the government that we are working with, we are in close partnership with Practica, with our university, and previously with UNICEF. So manual drilling is basically techniques of drilling borehole for groundwater exploitation using human or animal power without mechanized equipment. These techniques are well known since many centuries before the mechanized drilling start. So in many areas with the large alluvial deposit, they are quite common, like Nepal, Bangladesh, India, and other countries in the world. And if they are properly done, manual drill wells, they can provide sustainable and clean water supply. What is the advantage of manual drilling? The advantage of manual drilling are that it's much cheaper than mechanized borehole. We estimate 4 or 5 times less, or sometimes 10 times less. It depends on the cost of the pumps, on the depth of the boreholes. They are easy to implement with locally made equipment, and also they are manual work intensive and not capital intensive. So most of the money to realize such a borehole, they are spent and remain in the community, so they can generate income. On the other hand, the limitation of manual drilling is that they cannot be drilled in hard rock, and they cannot be drilled when water table is very deep. So for this reason, it's a approximate technique, but the suitable zone where this is possible must be identified before starting a program of manual drilling. With UNICEF, we did maps of suitable zone in manual drilling in 15 countries, starting from 2008. They were country-level maps, so not detailed. They are mainly oriented to define policy at national level about where to invest in promoting manual drilling. These are all the countries that we have done it from 2008 till now. And the general approach that was used in the UNICEF study was integrating geological suitability, water depth suitability, geomorphological suitability. It means identifying where we have soft layer till 30, 40 meters deep, where we have water not deeper than 20, 30 meters deep, and where there are geomorphological conditions suitable for the accumulation of unconsolidated sediments. And this was the general approach that was adapted for the different countries according to the data available and to the morphology and the characteristics of each country. The data source that were used was the existing thematic maps, the national database of water points, and the qualitative experience of water experts in the country. And the limitation of this approach that we follow for 3 or 4 years with UNICEF is that it's mainly dependent on the availability of data. So in some situations, the interpretation is not reliable, and it also cannot be more detailed than the country level. And the approach is not systematic, so the interpretation depends on the available data, and also the quality of the information obtained from the local experience can vary from site to site. So it is not easy to use this approach and compare results in different countries. So for this reason, we run the UPGro research project. We have partners at the University Cheikh Anta Diop in Senegal, the National Water Authority in Guinea, the SNAP, and UNICEF both in Guinea and Senegal, because UNICEF is interested in promoting manual drilling in different countries, so in Africa. The objective of the research is the integration of direct hydrogeological information from existing database with indirect parameters from remote sensing and terrain modeling to characterize the shallow aquifers, identify a suitable zone for manual drilling. The project started in November 2013, was expected to last 1 year. We had an extension also because we had several problems in our project with the Ebola outbreak in Guinea. So the two study areas are the northwestern Senegal, the region of Louga, and the central eastern part of Guinea, the region of Kankan and Farana. More or less, there are 30,000 square kilometers each area. The scientific approach that we are using is, from one side, we identify at the specific points where we have the borehole data and borehole logs, the hydrogeological feature. From the other side, we evaluate different geoenvironmental indicators coming from thematic maps and satellite data analysis. So we obtain the geology, the soil, the morphometry, the vegetation, the soil moisture, and the thermal inertia. So there is a set of parameters that we use it. We put in a relation these two levels of information. We try to see the geostatistical model that can explain the relation with this, and we use the geoenvironmental indicator to spatialize the data, the point data obtained from borehole logs. And with this, we can obtain a map of suitable zone for manual drilling. The advantage of this approach compared with what was done with the UNICEF and the detail that we can have with the satellite data and the digital terrain model is much higher than what we can obtain in some country with thematic maps, and also they are available wherever we want. So basically we use the thematic-based maps, the digital elevation model, the MODIS satellite images, 250 meter resolution or 1 kilometer resolution, depending on the parameters, the radar data, the hazard data to estimate soil moisture. So from this, we obtain a different set of parameters. From the other hand, we process the data of borehole logs to obtain transmissivity, permeability, depth of a rod, and depth of water at specific location. We calibrate our model using part of the data, and we use another set of data to validate at the end of the interpretation our spatialization of data, and with this we obtain our maps.
2 minutes.
Yeah.
So 2 minutes.
Yeah. The first result was to define procedure to obtain suitability for manual drilling. So basically there are 2 steps. One is the feasibility of manual drilling, depending on depth of a rod, depth of water level, and thickness of lateritic layers. And when we define that there are the conditions to make feasible manual drilling, we obtain the potential for the exploitation based on the transmissivity of the shallow aquifers that is related to the yield that we can obtain with manual drilling. One of the activities that we have done, we have taken the database of water points. We standardized the structure of data in Senegal and Guinea. We identified the most frequent categories of lithology, and we assigned stratigraphic codes that was able then in the next step to be included in an automatic procedure to analyze this data and obtain the different hydrogeological parameters at borehole location. So basically we use the same approach that we use already in northern Italy in previous study. We use a specific software that analyzes that every 2 meters the textual components of the log, transform it in conductivity, and we obtain texture, hydraulic conductivity, depth of a rock, depth of water table, and lateritic horizon for the whole borehole log. With this, we obtain the different parameters. Here we have a set of parameters that we obtain at the borehole logs, and applying the model to estimate suitability for manual drilling, we estimate in Senegal in 130 position the suitable position. Then, from the point of view of remote sensing, we use radar data to analyze the apparent thermal inertia. Apparent thermal inertia is a parameter easier to extract the real thermal inertia, but the basic of our analysis was the thermal behavior of shallow layers are depending on their water content and their lithology. So, using apparent thermal inertia, we used MODIS data in, at 1 kilometer and 250 meters. We created daily time series of apparent thermal inertia, and in dry season, we evaluated where there are anomalies of thermal inertia at, that are depending not from the rainfall, in this case, because they are in dry season, but from the water content and the soil lithology. From the point of view of vegetation dynamics, we analyze multitemporal series of NDVI, normalized difference vegetation index from satellite images of MODIS series, 250 meter resolution, and we obtain in some specific parameters like the length of the dry season, the difference between the growth of vegetation in dry season and in the wet season, and the persistence of vegetation in dry season. The indication was that the rationale of this was that where vegetation is still present in dry season, it means that there are water-bearing layers able to give water to the roots. And from the point of view of the soil moisture dynamics, we use the satellite radar data, hazard data, and we used to obtain the maps of presence of vegetation in the dry presence of soil moisture in the dry season, and the rate of decrease of soil moisture after the end of the rainy season. So till here, we have achieved a specific software to analyze and process the data of boreholes. We have defined a structural method to estimate suitability for manual drilling. We have generated maps of different hydrogeological parameters and suitability for manual drilling at point position in Senegal. From the remote sensing point of view, we are obtained maps of the different parameters of soil moisture, phenology of vegetation, and apparent thermal inertia. And we have done a first set of data collection in Senegal, obtaining geophysics survey and pump test to calibrate our interpretation obtaining from existing data. What we still have to do it, we have to complete the field data collection in Senegal and in Guinea, depending on the Ebola outbreak, validate the hydrogeological interpretation with the field information, definition of a geostatistical model, and integrate the analysis of data from remote sensing, thematic maps analysis, and borehole logs, spatialize the hydrogeological information, and generating the maps of suitability for manual drilling. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Fabio. So quite a mix of presentation topics, but we've got this common theme of rural groundwater. Now we have time for questions up until 1 o'clock, so just over half an hour. I would ask you, when you put your hand up and you pass the mic, to give your name and affiliation, and try to keep it short and brief so that we can get as many questions in as possible. But I'm going to start with a question from the online audience. So Sean from SCAT has asked a question directly at Alida, which is, where next for this research? If you want a few minutes to think about that, I can take a couple more questions, or you can go ahead.
I can go ahead.
Okay.
Okay, thanks, Sean, for your question. So talking about the research, really the research side about it, it's Portsmouth University who's working on it, and the role of Practica is that at this moment we are in contact with several partner organizations, for example UNICEF, to try and set up some pilot projects to work with these alternatives, to set up alternative hand pump management with a main focus on the role for the private sector. And in this new activities, it will still be Portsmouth who is doing the research and analysis, like Practica. Okay, we are Practica, but we are mainly in the field, and we are focused on setting up new things and work on capacity building for local entrepreneurs. So that's something that's going on, but we are still looking also for field partners, because from the Practica side, we are not an implementing partner. We don't have our own programs. So the most important thing is that for any new activities, we want to first start at locations where new pumps are constructed, new pumps are implemented, either at rehabilitated wells or at new wells. And from there, we are dependent on implementing programs from our partner organizations. So this is something that's going on, and I think we'll talk about more partner organizations who can collaborate in this.
Great. Okay, so I think we can take questions from the audience. Beatrice, perhaps the gentleman next to you. Yeah. Yes.
Hi, Alvar Kloses from IMI. I have a question also for Alida. Why the role of the private sector? Why do you push for it? Is it because you find lots of problems dealing with like local governments, like national governments, regarding corruption or stuff like that? And also the second question is, have you done any socioeconomic studies on the feasibility of those pay-per-use pumps in terms of? You presented this. There was this picture of this pay-per-use pump or something with the card and then the chip.
Yeah.
And I was thinking of the economic feasibility in terms of pressures on household budgets, and how much does that represent in terms of the costs of water, etc.
Okay, thanks for your questions. The first question: why private sector? For example, you on the other hand you mentioned the government institutions. And we think, and I think many people, I hope at least many people in this room think that the government is very important in regulation and in the, but in most cases, if you think about water supply or water services, it's not the government who is the service provider. And that's in most sub-Saharan African countries, it's moving to in that direction, that the government has responsibilities, especially in regulation, but not as a service provider. And in urban areas, it's very common to have the private sector as a service provider, but in rural areas, it's less common. But we think that same principles adapted, but same principles can work for rural areas as well. Instead of, currently it's not the government, it's the communities who are the managers and who are the responsible units. And we think that's not a good approach, but we think the private sector can have an important role. And then the socio-economic, and
Just to clarify, you think communities are not the right approach?
Communities are not the entity who should be the managers. They should be users, and they should be the one who use the water and who pay for it, at least if possible. And but they should not be the service providers. That's something I would state here, and we can discuss about that. The second question about the socio-economic, and I think that's a very good question, and I sent that question by email already to you. This is very dependent per location. And also, I started my presentation with saying something about, for example, pipe supplies, hand pumps. And I think any water supply project should start with these socio-economic surveys, etc. And in some cases, people are willing and able to pay for pipe supply. And then why don't you put pipe supply as which can even give a better service? And in other areas, it's impossible for people even to pay. To pay for a service from a hand pump, so you need to think of subsidy from either government or another external funder. And okay, the examples I mentioned, for example, the Prepaid, which is currently piloted in Kajiado area in south of Kenya. I was there 3 weeks ago, and those people, they are quite some money. Okay, many of them are. Okay, they are the Maasai. Many of them are even pastoralists. But in terms of paying for water, there's a kind of many people in Kajiado area. They pay for water large amounts, like for example, 0.2. Okay, okay, they pay very high amounts of water because of the water scarcity, and especially in water scarcity areas, you'll find that there's some. Paying for water is more common in that kind of areas. So, but I fully agree that the socio-economics, it's like the first step in any project, and you should base your financial arrangement on that. So, I would say, and I think, for example, Water for People in Uganda is doing that very nice. They start with some socio-economic analysis with all the household surveys, and based on that, they make an estimation of which water supply option would be best for this area. And that's also an approach that Practica works with. We don't say, okay, we are going to start with a hand pump project. No, we are going to work on water supply for a certain area, and based on the socio-economics. You also have the management structure, but yeah, I hope it helps a bit.
Okay. Before passing on to another question, I'd just like to see if any of the other presenters would like to comment on this question about the role of the private sector in rural water supply service delivery.
Yep.
Yeah. Yep.
No, I think I think it's, from the things that you said, I think it's probable that clustering could bring down the operation and maintenance costs, and that would be a good thing to do, whatever the approach was to taking care of them. So I'm happy with that. I would be interested to know from the Prepaid case what proportion of the costs, of the total costs, the users are actually paying. and then I'll wait. I'll hold my peace for other comments. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Okay, let's move on. Vinny at the back, I think, would like to say something.
Hi, Vinny Casey from WaterAid. I just have two quick questions, one for Jeff and the other for Alida. Jeff, firstly, thanks. Great presentation. Good to see localized monitoring of groundwater taking place at the community level there. You presented the methods that people are using to collect data. I just had a question on what now do they actually do with it? What operating principles have they set up, like that they enact when they see certain scenarios unfolding with the data? Has any work been done in that direction? For example, if you see progressive downward trends, what do people do? And just a question, do people actually really definitely see the value of the data and integrate use of it into their agricultural practices or household water use practices? So that's one question for Jeff there. And then just to Alida, on the prevalence of pipe schemes or the growing role of pipe schemes, definitely we will see an increased prevalence of pipe schemes, but they have already been around for a long time, and there are huge management challenges associated with running those that are quite well established. And I agree with you, we're definitely not going to see the end of the hand pump anytime soon. And in fact, use of pipe schemes in many hydrogeological situations, they just don't permit use of pipe scheme water supplies anyway. So we are going to have to depend on hand pumps for some time now. So my question is, just in the work that you've done, what analysis of self-supply options has been done? Because obviously many of the rural water supply solutions at the moment, certain hand pump types, are simply too expensive for communities to operate and maintain. That's just the bottom line. They're just too expensive. There are other pump options. You mentioned the rope pump. They cost about $140. They're generally in sub-Saharan Africa configured at a community level. But what's the role for like household-driven user investment in their own water supplies in the work that you're doing? Self-supply, essentially. Thanks.
Okay, Jeff, do you want to go first?
Okay, thank you for the question. It's just to reiterate, if I understand that you were asking of how the communities would use that information in terms of managing their resource and in terms of planning their irrigation development. Well, right. The short answer is that we have monitored for the transition between the dry season and the wet season for part of a year so far. So that's the first part, is to get that data. And what we had built into the next stage was to so the first part that we've done is try to understand the resource, to try to establish the monitoring. And I think it's absolutely critical that that information then feeds back and the community are using it, because what we were interested in is what's the incentive for communities to monitor formally their water resources. So that's exactly what we intend to do next, is to develop the tools and to continue to work with the communities to do that. The important period of the year, obviously, is the transition from the wet season to the dry season, where there would be potential for a second irrigated crop. So we haven't done that work at this stage, purely because we need to sort of complete the cycle of gathering data and then working with the community to actually develop how that data can be used. What we intended to do was build it together with existing projects on watershed management that are already in progress at that particular site. So there is a lot of understanding and activities about managing the resource, and we intended to work alongside that. So work in progress that we hope to be able to continue.
Could I just ask, as a point of clarification, are these multiple use sources, or are they purely being used for irrigation?
At the moment, most of the irrigation comes from surface water. So what we're interested in is that transition from surface water irrigation to use of groundwater irrigation for dry season.
But these are groundwater points that are already being used for domestic uses? Or?
They're used, at the moment, most of the use is domestic. It's backyard irrigation and very, very low tech abstraction. So not even manual pumps in most cases. There are a few hand pumps used for domestic purpose.
Okay. So Elida, shall we move on to you with the other two questions?
Okay. So maybe first the question of John about the prepaid hand pumps in Kenya. Actually, with these pilot pumps, there are quite some users, and the money collections are quite high. So they collect. The first pumps are running now for a bit more than a year, and they collect about 800 or 800 to 900, even up to $1,000 a year per pump. So that's quite a lot of money. And from that money, you can cover maintenance costs. There's the service company who's responsible. He has some costs, and even the investment cost can be paid in quite a reasonable short period. And I think, in these pilot cases, it's working very well. But I'm not 100% sure about how this can work in other cases, especially with the water price. They sell it for $3 or $4 per 20-liter jerrycan, but this can differ per area. But in general, as it works like the pilot projects work, it can cover all costs, I would say. Then the second question from Vincent. You asked about self-supply, and I prepared to say something about self-supply in my presentation. Actually, it is not really a part of the research work, because the research work, it's mainly focused on hand pumps, but I really see this relation that you mentioned, especially in areas with shallow groundwater tables where you find a lot of people with private wells, and it's far better, and as you know, Practica Foundation a bit, you know that we promote self-supply a lot. It's far better to work on improvements of the private wells compared to working with communal hand pumps. And there's one issue with self-supply is water quality, and I think for example, household water treatment can be a very good option in that. But on the other hand, you see also situations where the hand pump gets water from a deeper aquifer, and the hand pump is the only place in the area, only point where you get better quality water. So people use it mainly for drinking water, and for the other water they get it from their own private wells. So that's two things I see from self-supply. I think that's basically what I can say.
Great. I'm just going to take a question from the online audience, and then I'll come back to you. This is a question specifically for Fabio, from Mark Bridges, who asks, was the software you used for the remote sensing analysis developed in-house, or is this commercially available like a GIS package?
For the remote sensing analysis?
Yes.
Yeah, basically for remote sensing analysis, we use Envy, that is a commercial software, but there are also free software that can do the same. So in some cases, not all the analysis that we have done it, you can do it with free software, or at least we use Envy because the procedure to extract parameters from a multitemporal series of vegetation was developed in our university a few years ago. So we adapted that software, that routine that we have produced at the university to analyze the data of Senegal and Guinea.
Okay.
So Envy is one of the most common software for remote sensing used broadly all over the world.
Okay, thank you. I saw some hands up over here. Richard, I'll come to you in a minute. Is it Rob? Yeah.
Thanks. Rob Hope from Oxford University. A question for Elida, if I may. Sorry to target you.
I'm happy.
Do you think financial sustainability is compatible with the human right to water in terms of universal, safe, reliable drinking water services? And the context for that is some of the private sector models that you're looking at, which I think are very interesting, and you know we're working on these things as well. is the danger if you're cherry picking high performance hand pumps, and some of the ones you mentioned are very, very selective. What happens to the more marginal, vulnerable communities? How do you assure that they get access to drinking water services?
Okay, thanks for your question. Yes, I do think that these approaches that I've been presenting, they match well with the human right to water. But I think in any approach, okay, the first thing I think I've mentioned several times is that you need a good overview of all the costs and some insight in the ability and the willingness of people, also ability of people to pay for the water. And if you're working in an area where people cannot pay, and for example self-supply options are also not good, I don't mind if there's a good subsidy program from the government, so that, for example, part of the costs are paid by the government, part of the costs are paid by the users, so the users get not free water but cheap water. I don't mind, it's fine, but then you still need these financial arrangements and to really make sure that that the payments are done, and then there's a good arrangement. And for example, some interesting thing, and I think that happens already in a community-based management approach, is that in any community you might have some vulnerable people or some people who can't pay, and in a community-based management approach, I've seen communities where there's one or two people, they don't have to pay because they can't pay, whatever. And for example, in the most advanced approach I've presented is, for example, the prepaid hand pumps. And the interesting part is they work in communities, and even in these communities, they've agreed that there are some people who can't pay for this. So the good part with the prepaid system, you can pre-program the private tags, the private chips. So these persons, they are allowed for 20 liters of water per day. So not everybody can use it. It's only for a fixed amount. They can get water for free. So it's fine. You'll find an arrangement for the poor people, but it doesn't. The system remains the same, so to say.
So yes.
Yes. My answer is finally yes. Very sure. 100%.
Okay. It's great that your presentation is generating so many questions, but let's see. Has anyone got any questions for any of the other three presenters? Okay. Can we take? Yes, just wait for the mic. It's okay.
Thank you. My question is to Fabio about the yield of groundwater. You've mentioned in your presentation projects in Senegal and in Guinea. I want to find out how much can you get groundwater yield in a country like Senegal, which is semi-desertic, Sahelian, and Conakry. I don't understand that.
The type of borehole that we are promoting, that we are studying, it depends on the hydrogeological situation and from the pumping system you put on that. So let's see that manual drill borehole in general, they are not for large and powerful pumps. So you can put hand pumps, solar pumps. So let's assume no more than 1 liter per second, or that's the average value of reference for solar pump. So you cannot use, I think, manual drilling to provide water for urban area or for large town or something like this. Then in arid country like Senegal, so Senegal, the yield of boreholes or mechanized borehole, they are quite high, because from one side it's an arid country, from the other side there are high permeability, high hydraulic conductivity of aquifers. So in northern Senegal, for example, where we are working, you have a borehole that can give 20, 30 liters per second easily in specific hydrogeological condition. So the main limitation is not the amount of water, because they are regional aquifers. So especially in a rural area where people, they are not concentrated, so there is not the risk of depleting groundwater for intensive use in a concentrated area. So, and also in Guinea, in the area where we are working, each village will be like a 10 kilometer one from the other, small villages. So at the end, the water balance of the aquifer is not affected, or it's something that you have to consider, but it's not the main risk. But the limitation is the permeability of shallow layers. In case of manual drill wells, as you are using shallow aquifers, in general, the permeability is lower than you go in fractured rocks in deep aquifer. So for this reason, you cannot expect very high yield. manual drill for small communities is a good solution, because for a number of 200, 300, 500 people, you can provide enough water at a lower price than mechanized borehole.
Great, thank you. Sorry, you've had your hand up for a while. Beatrice, could you?
Joel Gill, Geology for Global Development. John, you mentioned in your presentation that the technical capacity is often at the root of the underlying causes that you mentioned, and I was wondering what you think UPGro, what role UPGro has in terms of strengthening this technical capacity, given that we're focusing on rural areas. Often we're talking small NGOs who are implementing water projects, very underfunded district water engineers who are rotated after elections, political appointments, often not very well connected to, say, central geological surveys or ministries of water. So what needs to be done or can be done by the international community, by projects such as UPGro, in terms of strengthening the technical capacity of those people who are managing the projects?
It's a good question, and I can give you 2 or 3 answers. The first answer is related to the way in which the research was done. I mean, we involved all of our partners in the design and carrying out the research and going into the field. And Richard will remember that one consequence of this was that the teams in the field were quite large, because everybody came along to learn. So first one is co-researching, which was mentioned earlier on, and talking to people between the phases. I mean, one of the advantages of doing the community work and then having a pause and then doing the technical work was that we could talk to the partners between the phases and modify what we were going to do accordingly. Third one is presenting the results and going back to the question this morning about choosing sort of horses for courses in terms of how you get involved in a dialogue about the results. When we were having coffee, Vivian was telling me about the meetings that they've had with the Ministry of Water and the district water officers before we've actually come to the end of the project. So those the findings of the project are already beginning to move down through the Uganda government water system, and all of those partners will be involved in the larger project as well. So I think that's one of the ways, or several of the ways in which UPGro can do that. But you know, that's it's a big task. Yep,
Thank you.
cool.
Next question, Richard. Sorry, I kept you waiting.
Thanks, Naomi. Yeah, I'm on the humble hand pump as well, and back to community management. And I wonder whether we've, over the years, got a bit of a wrong concept about community management, because it's pretty clear from a lot of cases that there is a strong association between dysfunctional community management and poor water services. And I think we've tended to assume that the cause-effect relationship is in the direction that I've just said. Poor community management leads to poor service. And I'm beginning to wonder more and more whether it's the other way round. As John was suggesting, that if you give the community something which is impossible to manage, they won't be able to manage it. So that, I think we need to think about the direction of cause and effect, and not just be a bit lazy about an association between two things. I'm working in East Timor quite a lot at the moment, where the majority of the water supplies are piped, mostly from springs and base flow of streams and rivers. Failure rates are extraordinarily high. They go out of service very quickly. And what we're starting to think about is systems which are relatively small and easy to manage, and which therefore lend themselves to community management, and the more complex and more difficult to manage, more vulnerable systems where you need local government, strong local government support and possibly private sector support. But it's not just a private sector solution across the board. And part of the background to that is that in Timor, and I think in a number of other places, community management is actually enshrined in legislation, or at the very least in policy. So we can't just say community management is dead. I think that was a rather irresponsible comment from the quotation. I know it wasn't your words you were quoting. Community management is not dead. Like the humble borehole and hand pump, it will continue for a long time. And I just wonder whether we go round in circles. You know, we went from government management of water services to community management because we said years ago governments can't do it. And now are we saying communities can't do it? What's left? Private sector. What will we do when the private sector fails? It's an open question, really, not to anybody in particular, and I'm not picking on anybody in particular, but I think there are a lot of questions that we still need to get to the root of.
Okay, thank you, Richard. Okay, you want to respond? Great. Go ahead, John.
No, I would just agree. I mean, there is a danger that if the pendulum swings too far in the private direction, in which they have responsibility for everything, the private sector will cherry pick, as they do in all other fields of activity, unless there are again, one of my underlying root causes, unless there are the means to, in the way that contracts are let and supervised, unless there are means to prevent them doing that, you know, there will still be people who are furthest from the main road and in the most difficult conditions who will have the hardest time.
Jeff?
Could I just add briefly that raised sort of big concerns with me just hearing that statement, and surely the control over the water is of the major concern, but are there other roles for sort of private sector involvement in terms of like developing the capacity for repairs of equipment, so that the management still stays with the community, but there are, for example, I discussed with some people about using garage mechanics and developing their business in terms of servicing boreholes. So that's not managing the boreholes, but it's providing the service to the community management from the private sector.
And then I'll let you.
Concerning, I have some experience of community management in Guinea that is working quite well. And one of the reasons, Guinea is one of the poorest country with the most difficult country to communicate from one side to the other of the country with the lack of infrastructure and everything. But most of the hand pumps, they are working in Guinea because they have two models standardized at country level, and there is a strong presence of supervision from the National Water Authority at regional level and at local level. So the management is done by the community, but then they have the assistance of technician. In my case, I found a very well-trained technician from the National Water Authority. And so for me, community management is not working if we consider that community must be left alone and repair and everything can be. So the models of community management still they are working. There is a link between the community level, the regional level, and the national level. Another good lessons, I think it can be done from one region in southern Angola, where with the support of the Dutch cooperation since many years ago, they are integrating a complex system of water management in which there are a technical group at municipal level assisting each village, where there are community group in each village, collecting money and paying for spare parts and assistance. And there, less than 15% of the hand pump, they are not working. this is quite a good indicator compared with the average of Africa. So it depends. I mean, I think that it can't work if we consider that the community, they have to do it everything alone, but they have no spare part to purchase available. They don't have any technical assistance in case of major failure. So in this case, community management, for sure, it doesn't work. But there are different models of community management.
Okay, so I would like to say two things. One thing about Guinea, I visited Guinea. I did some fieldwork last year, and this is the only example I've come across where the community management approach is working because of the strong follow-up and supervision from the authority, from the government. And still, I don't like it. Sorry, it's very inefficient. And okay, the things I've been talking about, and I think things can be improved. But on the other hand, if it's working, I wouldn't say they should change. But if you see all the input which is given from the government to all those communities, I'm still not a fan of it. But I visited many pumps in Guinea, and okay, it's working. I agree on that. And there are some few other cases where the community-based management approach, it is working, but I'm still okay. We can improve. About cherry picking, I think it happens a lot in when you think of private sector who's going to start managing water services. But I think one of my last remarks in my presentation was to work with the district approach. And I think above the private sector, there's the government working, okay, depending on the location, working with NGOs, other partners. And they are the ones who are in the end responsible. They are the government, and they don't cherry pick. They have an approach of reaching everybody. So for them, and that's why we always work with the government, in the end, the government is not cherry picking, and everybody gets water, or at least that's the aim. And in I think the private sector can play a role in any water supply, but in some very difficult areas, it might be more subsidized by the government. No problem. But yeah, that's it.
Great. Okay, thank you. I think this might be a good point to end. It's now 1:05, and no doubt you're all feeling a bit hungry for lunch. And I think a lot of these issues will probably be picked up again in the afternoon in those parallel sessions and the final plenary. So I'd just like to thank our presenters. Maybe we could just give them a round of applause, and then we'll break for lunch.